Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjan Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjan Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjan Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjan Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Jaya Kodanitai, Jaya Maya Pochachi, Jaya Kodanitai, Maya Pochachi. Jaya Giridhari Lal, Giridhari Lal, Giridhari Lal, Giridhari Lal. Jaya Sri Chatsila, Jaya Sri Chatsila, Sri Chatsila, Jaya Sri Chatsila. Jaya Nrsimhare, Jaya Nrsimhare, Jaya Nrsimhare, Jaya Nrsimhare. Shayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivradikacharya Rasacharya Shri Srimad Shri Bhakti Vedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada Ki Shri Guru Parampara Ki Anantakoti Vaishnavinda Ki Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Nitai Gaur Premanandi. Is there any special day today, Bhagavath?
No.
Reading from Srila Prabhupada Leela Amrita, chapter entitled, I have done my part. Lord Chaitanya says, said Srila Prabhupada, Amara Agyaya Guru. One who can understand the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he can become Guru. Or one who understands his Guru's order in Parampara, he can become Guru. And therefore I shall select some of you. By repeating himself, Prabhupada emphasized his point. He would select who would be Guru. And he also repeated his other point. So there is no question of changing GBC. Rather, one who is competent, he can be selected to add by the vote of GBC. Of course, if someone falls away, Tamal Krishna proposed, just like in the past GBC men have fallen down, they should be replaced, said Prabhupada. They must be all ideal acharya. In the beginning, we have done for working, but now we should be very cautious. Anyone who is deviating, he can be replaced. There are few questions answered. The GBC men sat silently before Srila Prabhupada, awaiting any further instructions, but anxious not to tire him with their presence. So, Srila Prabhupada said, Tamal Krishna, there is a chanting party ready to do some kirtan. Maybe they could come in. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Yeah.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 14, Text 43, chapter entitled The Forest of Enjoyment. Yo Dustyajan Darasutan Yo Dustyajan Darasutan Yo Dustyajan Darasutan Surit Rajyam Riddhi Sprisha Surid Rajyam Riddhi Sprisha Surid Rajyam Riddhi Sprisha Chaho Yuvaiva Malavad Chaho Yuvaiva Malavad Chaho Yuvaiva Malavad Uttama Shloka Lalasa Uttama Shloka Lalasa Yodusya Jandara Sutan Sridrajam Riddhi Sprisha Jaho Yuvaiva Malavad Shloka Lalasa Yodusya Jandara Sutan Sridrajam Riddhi Sprisha Jehoyuvaiva Malavad Uttama Lalasa Yodusya Jandara Sutan Srirajam Ridisprisha Jehoyuvaiva Malavad Uttama Lalasa
Srirajam Vidishpisha Suridrajam Ridhisprisha Jehoyuvaiva Malavad Uttama Shloka Lalasa Yodhustya Jandara Sultan Suridrajam Ridhisprisha Jehoyuvaiva Malavad Uttama Shloka Lalasa
Yeah, the same Javat, it was formerly Maharaj Bharat, the son of Maharaj Rishabhadev. Tusyajan, very difficult to give up. Tara Sutan, the wife and children, or the most opulent family life. Surit, friends and well-wishers. Rajyam, a kingdom that extended all over the world. Riddhi Sprisha, that which is situated within the core of one's heart. Jaho, he gave up. Yuva Eva, even as a young man. Malavat, like stool. Uttama Shloka Lalasa, who was so fond of serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Known as Uttama Shloka. Translation. While in the prime of life, the great Maharaj Bharat gave up everything because he was fond of serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Uttama Shloka. He gave up his beautiful wife, nice children, great friends, and an enormous empire. Although these things were very difficult to give up, Maharaj Bharat was so exalted that he gave them up, just as one gives up stool after evacuating. Such was the greatness of His Majesty. Please repeat. While in the prime of life, the great Maharaj Bharat gave up everything because he was fond of serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Uttama Shloka. He gave up his beautiful wife, nice children, great friends, and an enormous empire. Although these things were very difficult to give up, Maharaj Bharat was so exalted that he gave them up, just as one gives up stool after evacuating. Such was the greatness of His Majesty. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. The name of God is Krishna, because He is so attractive that the pure devotee can give up everything within this material world on His behalf. Maharaj Bharat was an ideal king, instructor, and emperor of the world. He possessed all the opulences of the material world. But Krishna is so attractive that he attracted Maharaj Bharat from all his material possessions. Yet somehow or other the king became affectionate to a little deer and, falling from his position, had to accept the body of a deer in his next life. Due to Krishna's great mercy upon him, he could not forget his position, and he could understand how he had fallen. Therefore, in the next life, as Jad Bharat, Maharaj Bharat was careful not to spoil his energy, and therefore he presented himself as a deaf and dumb person. In this way, he could concentrate on his devotional service. We have to learn from the great King Bharat how to become cautious in cultivating Krishna consciousness. A little inattention will retard our devotional service for the time being. Yet any service rendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is never lost. Swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat, Bhagavad Gita 2:40. A little devotional service rendered sincerely is a permanent asset, as stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.17. Chaktva swadamam charanam bhujam hare bhajana bhakvo tapatettato yadi yatrakva vabhadrama buddhamushyakim kuvat apto bhajitam swadamata. Somehow or other, if one is attracted to Krishna, whatever he does in devotional service is a permanent asset, even if one falls down due to immaturity or bad association. His devotional assets are never lost. There are many examples of this, Ajamil, Maharaj Bharat, and many others. This Krishna consciousness movement is giving everyone a chance to engage in devotional service for at least some time. A little service will give one an impetus to advance and thus make one's life successful. In this verse, the Lord is described as Uttama Shloka. Uttama means the best, and Shloka means reputation. Lord Krishna is full in 6 opulences, one of which is reputation. Aishvaryasya samagrasya viryasya yashasha sriya. Krishna's reputation is still expanding. We are spreading the glories of Krishna by pushing forward this Krishna consciousness movement. Krishna's reputation, 5,000 years after the Battle of Kurukshetra, is still expanding throughout the world. Every important individual within this world must have heard of Krishna, especially at the present moment, due to the Krishna consciousness movement. Even people who do not like us and want to suppress the movement are also somehow or other chanting Hare Krishna. They say, the Hare Krishna people should be chastised. Such foolish people do not realize the true value of this meaning, this movement. But the mere fact that they want to criticize it gives them a chance to chant Hare Krishna. And this is its success. Amagyanatimrandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mahabhishtam Stapatam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupagadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shah Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sarvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shiva Shakan Vitam Sha Anshika Patarubhyas Sha Prabhasanabhyev Cha Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, there's a very interesting piece of information about the household life of Maharaj Bharat. Although it's often stated that when he was still young and while his wife was still young, he gave up the whole kingdom and went to meditate in Haridwar. However, although he was young, because it was actually Satya Yuga, it's described in Canto 5, Chapter 7, Text 8. Destiny fixed the time for Maharaj Bharat's enjoyment of material opulence at 1,000 times 10,000 years. When that period was finished, he retired from family life and divided the wealth he had received from his forefathers among his sons. He left his paternal home, the reservoir of all opulence, and started for Pulaha Ashram, which was situated in Haridwar. The Shalagram Shilas are obtainable there. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, according to the law of Daya Bhak, when one inherits an estate, he must hand it over to the next generation. Maharaj Bharat did this properly. First, he enjoyed his paternal property for 1,000 times 10,000 years. At the time of his retirement, he divided this property among his sons and left for Pulaha Ashram. So, not only did he have an enormous empire, it's described that he had a kingdom that extended all over the world. And he enjoyed that kingdom for 1,000 times 10,000 years. And during that time, he didn't grow old. So it's correct that he was still in the prime of life, but we shouldn't think that he was only like 35. He was like, 1,000 times 10 million years old. And he'd been enjoying for 10 million years a kingdom the entire size of the world with all of his huge family. He must have had more than just a few sons. It must have been a vast dynasty, similar to the Yadu dynasty even, like the size of the dynasty. So he must have had there must have been thousands of palaces for all of his family members. So it's like, because we could think that, oh yeah, well, it's not that difficult. Once you've heard about Krishna, so many devotees just give up their careers, and when they're in their prime of life, when they're in their 20s or in their early 30s. So many of our God brothers and God sisters gave up their families, gave up their education, gave up their careers. But here, we understand Maharaj Bharat, he'd been enjoying, he'd become so, but he obviously hadn't become conditioned to that enjoyment because he was so Krishna conscious. He possessed all the opulences of the material world, but Krishna is so attractive that he attracted Maharaj Bharat from all his material possessions. So therefore we shouldn't, we should understand that's how powerful Krishna is, that even if someone, has been enjoying material life for millions of years, still Krishna can capture the heart of such a person. It's interesting in the word for word here, in this verse, we've got Riddhi Sprisha, Riddhi Sprisha, that which is situated within the core of one's heart. So, I'm not sure. Yeah, as far as I understand, that's referring to he was actually these things were very difficult to give up because they were because you're so accustomed to enjoying them that they become deeply rooted in your consciousness. Riddhi Sprisha. Sprisha means to touch. So they're it's described that when when a living entity engages in sexual intercourse with his wife, then there's immediately a tight knot in the heart is actually created, and then from that tight knot becomes family, children, wealth, land, and then it just expands into more and more material attachment. So, and it would indicate from this verse that was kind of also the case with Maharaj Bharat, that he had great affection for his kingdom, for his family, for his friends, and his well-wishers. It's not that he was like some kind of impersonal renunciant throughout his life. No, he was an extremely loving, caring friend, father, well-wisher, king, a loving king to all of his citizens. He gave his heart to all of his grihastha activities. However, Uttama Shloka Lala Sa, one who was so fond of serving the Supreme Personality Godhead. He was so fond, so he was simultaneously performing devotional service. We see this in the life of Srila Prabhupada, especially in its interaction with his devotees in America, and especially the early devotees in America, that because he was so fond of serving Krishna, then he didn't have to practice kind of renunciation in the association of his young admirers and followers of the hippies, even though many of them were living such a degraded life. All other sannyasis who'd come to America from India, either they just fell down into Western living and ended up eating meat and drinking whiskey, using knives and forks, or they just remained completely detached and just like were like, very dry, renounced sannyasis, just giving instruction and not interacting at all with their disciples. But Srila Prabhupada, we can see that, he was like so affectionate, so affectionate to all of his young followers, irrespective of what their kind of situation was. If you read about some of his interactions, especially I remember he was staying with Govinda and Govinda Devi Dasi and Gaurasundra. He was staying in their house, I think it was in Boston. And Govinda Devi Dasi, she was the first devotee who learned how to look after Tulsi Devi. And Gaurasundra was a very powerful preacher and made a lot of devotees. But anyway, they were living in that house, and Gaurasundra and Govinda Devi Dasi, they had a cat, and the cat was always like just crawling, jumping around everywhere in the house, like doing what cats do. And the cat was always jumping onto Srila Prabhupada, and I remember also Govinda Devi Dasi and Gaurasundra, it was Srila Prabhupada's birthday while he was staying there at one time, and they made him a birthday cake, and they put on like 72 candles or however old he was on the cake. And they told Srila Prabhupada, now you have to blow them all out. You have to blow them all out in one, and you try and blow them all out in one go. And Srila Prabhupada did it. He sort of put on, Govinda Devi Dasi describes that he put on this face of childish sort of glee, childish glee, and he went, and he blew out all of the candles at once, which just before Srila Prabhupada left, the cat kind of jumped onto Srila Prabhupada's feet. It's such a dirty thing, like the cats, Cats, cats are quite clean in one sense. They're always cleaning themselves, but nevertheless, they're not clean. And like Srila Prabhupada, would often say that animals are not meant to be inside the house. But yeah, the cat actually, just before Srila Prabhupada left, the cat sort of dived onto Srila Prabhupada's feet. And then when Srila Prabhupada left, the cat left as well and was never seen again. I think the cat, as far as I remember, the cat died just very shortly after that. And anyway, there are so many amazing pastimes like that of Srila Prabhupada just living as an affectionate family member with his young devotees. But it never undermined his devotional service. And so obviously when we read about Srila Prabhupada's interactions with his disciples, we're very attracted by that interaction, and we think, wow, it'd be amazing if we could have that interaction with, all of our community members and all of our guests that come here. If we could learn how to be so affectionate and so personal, without that endangering our devotional service. So for that to take place, we have to become Uttama Shloka Lalasa. So this word Lalasa it's also used in the prayers of Narottam Das Thakur, Lalasa Mai, and it means intense greed for Krishna. So it's Lalasa Mai. It's basically the platform of, well, it's really prema actually. It's prema. It's just not being able to live for a second without Krishna's association. And so that platform is attained primarily through hearing and chanting about Krishna and the association of devotees, and hearing about Krishna's pure devotees also. And by the power of that, by the power of those pure devotees in this world, then, as Srila Prabhupada says, Krishna's reputation is still expanding throughout the world. Every important individual within this world must have heard of Krishna, especially at the present moment, due to the Krishna consciousness movement. So I mean, that's not an exaggeration. It's because devotees were preaching in all circles. They were preaching in the universities, doing the library program, obviously preaching in the colleges, doing college programs. They were preaching through on the streets, in the airports. And so at least in America, at least in America anyway, then Krishna consciousness was very much a part of everyday life for persons who were interested in, culture, in history, in politics, in social reform, persons who were interested in spirituality, anyone interested in those kind of fields. And then I suppose in that sense, Srila Prabhupada would say, well, these are important individuals because at least they're aspiring for some higher goal in life. That's, sometimes Srila Prabhupada did engage in like exaggeration, hyperbole, just for the sake of convincing people that Krishna consciousness was so important, then he would say things which were exaggerations. But I think at that time it wasn't actually an exaggeration. So much so that, of course, people were trying to take the devotees to court all over the world, prove that they were brainwashing people, prove that they were kidnapping respectable people's sons and daughters. And then, of course, there was that amazing court case in New York where Srila Prabhupada said, our defense is our books. We should take all of our books into court, and so that the jury have to read all of our books, the judges have to read all of our books. And then the outcome of that case was that the highest judge in New York, at least, ruled that Krishna consciousness was a bona fide religion. I mean, so that was like, a really amazing judgment, and it was like published in the New York Times. So this is what Srila Prabhupada means by important individuals. Srila Prabhupada means that people who are really want to keep on the pulse of what's happening in the world in terms of politics, in terms of, racial discrimination, sexual discrimination, in terms of the frontiers of science. Like there's so much now about consciousness, just like this whole universe. Just Srila Prabhupada said there's nowhere in the world where people would be studying the soul, but there's definitely lots of places now where people are studying the soul. Like it's big sort of departments of universities are just devoted to studying consciousness. And then there's so many people now are taking like yoga seriously, not just as an exercise, but as like a deep internal transformation therapy. So it's important that we that we continue to have a high profile in these kind of areas of academia and of political, political debate. And even if people think that we're religious fanatics, as Srila Prabhupada says, such foolish people do not realize the true value of this movement, but the mere fact that they want to criticize it gives them a chance to chant Hare Krishna, and this is its success. So we've got so many more avenues to pursue now to reach the important people in the world. And definitely here at Karuna Bhavan, we're doing that, through the yoga community and the vegan community. But we should also keep in touch with devotees worldwide and see how they're doing it by looking at ISKCON News and Dandavats, just to see how devotees are pioneering in different areas of social media and of academic in circles like that. And in this way, this is one way to generate a real kind of lalasa, a real kind of Uttama Shloka lalasa. It's exciting. Srila Prabhupada is so pleased by the devotees who want to preach in these kind of circles. So we all have some technical expertise, we all have some connections in different professional circles, even if we're not professionals ourselves, but we have some connections. So Srila Prabhupada is pleased by these kind of endeavors. He was especially pleased by the library party, and he was especially pleased by the Bhaktivedanta Institute. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions or comments? Additions? Yes.
So you mentioned sometimes Prabhupada, in terms of explaining Krishna consciousness, he would quote or say something a bit of an exaggeration. Yeah. What would that thing be like, which he exaggerated a bit?
Well, I mean, he might, for example, he said everyone in India is Krishna conscious. Yeah. It's not a sort of statistically accurate statement, but it creates a picture in people's minds that Krishna consciousness is an eternal and energetic principle. Krishna consciousness is so vibrant that anyone who's been born into that country, which has as part of its culture, knowledge of Krishna's pastimes, then it's to really just It's to give the devotees faith. I mean, it's used throughout. It's used throughout Vaishnava literature. Exaggeration is a tool of poetry, and it's in one sense it's used by devotees who are just in love with Krishna, and they know that Krishna is all pervading. They know that Krishna is absolutely everywhere. And they can't really restrict themselves, or they can't control themselves from expressing that kind of love that they have for Krishna, and they see Krishna as everywhere. So when Srila Prabhupada said everyone in India is Krishna conscious, he's in one sense he's not exaggerating, because he knows that anyone who thinks about Krishna just for a moment, then that connection is eternal, just like Srila Prabhupada says here. Some or other, if one is attracted to Krishna, whatever he does in devotional service is a permanent asset. Even if one falls down due to immaturity or bad association, his devotional assets are never lost. So it's not that everyone in India is like hearing about Krishna from childhood. Like there's 200 million Muslims in India, and probably like 50 million Christians. Perhaps they don't hear much about Krishna, and there'll be maybe 10 million communists in West Bengal. They're hearing about Karl Marx every day. But when they go to school and they see their friends, and there'll be like shops with Krishna's name there. There'll be like the Krishna shop, or there'll be billboards with Krishna films on. Like that. So because Srila Prabhupada knows that just like a little contact with Krishna is permanent, and actually will be revived in a future life, and because the pure devotees see that one life is really insignificant in the vast ocean of material existence, and that it's just like a few lifetimes, and people will revive that Krishna consciousness. So in that sense, India is the country where the energy is such that even if people are communists or Christians or Muslims, they'll be touched by Krishna in some little way, and they will in another life or another 2 lives. I mean, they maybe not be born in India again. They may be born in Russia if they're communists, and then they'll be born next door to a family of devotees or something like that. So Srila Prabhupada said, from a material perspective, like from a statistical, scientific perspective, many of Srila Prabhupada's statements are like extreme exaggerations, but from an absolute perspective of Krishna consciousness, they're not exaggerations at all, because Krishna's mercy is unlimited. The one name for Krishna is called Bhuri Karanaya Namo Lalaya. And this means Krishna is unlimitedly merciful, and is never inattentive for a moment to the plight of all the living entities. He's always like desiring that they can become Krishna conscious. So but if we're not on that platform of like pure devotional service, then we have to be careful how we use exaggeration. Hope that's okay. Okay, thank you very much. Stop there. Grantraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki, Jai. Nitai Gaura Premanandi.
Javat Vasi Prabhu ki
Ananta Koti